All right, working with chronic fatigue syndrome, ME experiment number 2. So scuba diving was no go, so I was thinking, what else could I do? I was a social worker in Canada, but that job didn't really exist in Southeast Asia in the same extent that it did in Canada. And also, you need to speak the local language of whatever country you're in, obviously, to really be effective at it. And at this point, I still basically only spoke English. Not basically, I only spoke English. So what else can I do? All my training, all my educational background is in social work and scuba diving now. Those two things really couldn't take me anywhere. So of course I'd heard there were a lot of foreigners overseas who were teaching English as a second language. So I thought, I can do that. So from Koh Tao, that small island in Thailand, I relocated to Bangkok and I started looking for work. So I actually ended up through a contact at the school where I got my certification. They knew somebody in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So I did a Skype interview with this person at this school and I got the job. Of all the lessons that I had to learn about working and living with chronic fatigue syndrome, this job was the hardest one. This was also probably the moment in my life when I was the most naive, because I really did not appreciate how difficult teaching was, and everything so far had shown me that my body was not capable of handling full-time work. Never mind full-time, Monday to Friday, really high energy work like teaching children all day, every day. And to top things off, this teaching job wasn't teaching English as a second language, which is the only thing that I was even close to being trained to do. This job was working at an international school, a private school, teaching English as a first language. So it was going to be teaching poetry and Shakespeare and literature and grammar and all those other things that English teachers teach. There was just a lot of demands, and this job wiped me out. From the first week I was barely functioning. I don't know how I did it, but I lasted almost 6 months. I was bringing coffee in a jug. I want to say a mug, but it was so big, it's probably more accurately called a jug. And it was so strong. I made it myself at home and I put so many scoops of coffee in it that it was like rocket fuel. And I still barely got through the day. And the minute I got home, I would collapse on the couch and then I would not move. Every single minute I was away from this job was resting, and painful resting, full of suffering. You know, that intense kind when you're laid out and you're in agony and you can't read, you can barely watch TV, like everything in your body is screaming at you. And I had to start taking sedatives a lot to sleep at night because I was having trouble sleeping. It was just a mess. It was a mess. Every second I had away from this job was just spent collapsed somewhere, wondering how I was going to go back the next day. And I called in sick a lot. I was unreliable. A lot of the same themes that I'd seen every other time I tried to work with this illness. But I kept pushing through because I didn't see an alternative. I remember at one point towards the end of my 6 months at this job, being at home at my apartment and just being curled up in a ball on the floor of my bathroom, just curled up in the fetal position and just sobbing. I didn't know how I was going to keep going. I was just so beat down and I just felt like this illness was destroying me and that living life was impossible, and I just didn't know how I was going to keep going. I was just really a mess, and I got severely depressed, and I really struggled to get through it all. And I didn't like that feeling of being at work again, and just the whole time thinking about leaving, just trying to figure out how I was going to escape. What could I do to get out of there? One night there was actually a fire at the school. Thankfully the school was empty and nobody was hurt, but there was enough damage to the school that it was going to be shut down for quite a while for it to be repaired. So it came to be that the kids were going to be relocated way to another suburb in another school, and I was going to have to start commuting there, and that was just it. I was just done. I was hanging on by a thread already when the school was close by to me. There's just no way I could add on some big commute. Just no. So I quit. You'd think there'd be some relief from being free of this, what became daily torture for me. You'd think that once I'd finally quit, it'd be like, oh, okay, I'm good now. But the damage that I had done to my body in those 6 months was severe. It was significant. There was no, like, I'll take a week or two and then I'll be back to my usual kind of mediocre functioning self. It was bad. It took me months. I was laid out. I could barely do anything. And the depression that came with this was overwhelming. So I really dug myself into a really deep hole by naively jumping into something that I was in no way equipped to do. So the lesson that I learned from this not so uplifting part of my story, but it's, these are the truths of chronic fatigue syndrome, and I think it's important to share these experiences, is that taking on way more than you are ready to, thinking that you'll just figure it out, you'll find a way, you'll push through, you'll make it work because you feel like you have no other choice, can be incredibly dangerous. At least that was my experience. That is what the takeaway was for me. It's basically the equivalent of dousing my life in gasoline, a life that was already challenging, and then just waiting for it to explode. It wasn't if it was going to blow up, it was when. It was a ticking time bomb that was going to go off, absolutely. And then there was going to be a lot of devastation and a lot of destruction and a lot of repairing and rebuilding once that happened. Okay, attempt number 3 at working with chronic fatigue syndrome. And good news, this one went a little bit better. Not great, but it did go better. It's definitely a much less discouraging and depressing story, and an example of how working with chronic fatigue syndrome, at least for me, at this stage of my recovery, was feasible. Not optimal, but it was doable. So once I recovered from this teaching disaster, once I got my body back up to where it had been, okay, but not great, I attempted to go back to work again. Once again, through a connection, a friend of a friend, somehow I managed to get hired working in the IT department of a massive oil and gas company in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So I stayed in Kuala Lumpur. I have no IT experience. I'm not a technical person really at all. But the job that I was hired for was a new position that they had created. They wanted a person on their team of highly technical, very intelligent people, but not necessarily always so communication savvy, or maybe not always as strong in the creativity department. They wanted to bring someone on who would be that person in the team. I wasn't really trained or qualified to do any of this, but I wasn't trained or qualified to be a teacher either. Or a scuba diver at one point. So I had to keep reinventing myself. It was an interesting experience. And the great news about this job, the thing that made it seem like this one would work when every other attempt at going back to work had failed, was that this job was going to allow me to work from home quite a bit of the time. I mean, I had to show up for meetings and, scheduled things in the office, of course. But the rest of the time, as long as my work was getting done, I could be working from anywhere. So for me, that was going to be at home, in bed, or on my couch with my laptop. So I thought, this I can do. That last job failed spectacularly because it was incredibly demanding. But this one, laid back, can kick back at home on the couch in my pajamas with my laptop. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. This one's going to be fine. Although the work excited me and I loved the creativity of it, I loved getting to be this quirky, fun person on the team that just livened things up and, brought toys to meetings and played music and, invented crazy games. And I got to, run innovation workshops and just, really a lot of focus on creativity and communication, which are two things that I absolutely love, I've come to learn, and that I thrive when those things are a part of my life. But I had seriously underestimated how taxing it is to work a full-time job, even from home. I was naive in this area as well because I'd never done it before. And I thought, working from home from the couch, how hard can that be? But it is really, really hard because I still had deadlines, I still had a lot of work to do, I still had a lot of projects to do, and keeping on top of them from anywhere was really, really draining. I ended up lasting at this job for 3 years. So I kept it up for quite a while. So it was doable, but it was incredibly draining. I was always hanging on by a thread. And anytime things came up where I had to be in the office, I was really stressed. Depending on what time of day it was. Like by the afternoons, I was always so exhausted. So if I had to, say, run a workshop in the afternoon, I was just full of so much anxiety leading up to that afternoon because I knew it was going to be my worst time and I was going to be exhausted and I had no idea how I was going to get through it. And then every once in a while, there'd be a full day activity, like a conference or something that I had to go to for work. Those full days were nearly impossible. One full day of work in the office, I don't even know what to compare it to. It was virtually impossible. I could get through one if I had to, but it was tough and it would be a lot of coffee. But after that day was done, I would crash and I would either work from home the next day, which might be mostly resting, or I'd just outright call in sick. So that one full day would destroy me. And when I would see it on my calendar coming up that I knew I had that coming up, I would just be so stressed. It's just crazy how difficult that was for me. So once again, I had signed myself up for something that I was in no way physically capable of doing. And I was barely getting through. And I wanted to be working on myself. I wanted to be working on my recovery. But every time I tried, it just made me sicker. I just didn't have an ounce of anything to spare outside of keeping that job afloat. And also at this stage in my life, I just really needed and wanted some friends. So whatever spare energy I had, I put into my social life, which, helped me keep my head above water. So between having that sense of community and then staying on top of the demands of my job, that was it. Healing and recovery, there was just no room for it in my life. So I learned 3 lessons from this job experience as well. And one of them, as I've pretty much already stated, is that if I had a job that wasn't physical in nature and that was accommodating in ways like I could work from home a lot, then it was more doable. But it was nothing even close to easy, and it was still incredibly stressful. But at this stage in my recovery, if there was a job with enough accommodations, I could do it. And the second thing I learned was that because when I went into this job, I decided that I wasn't going to tell anyone at this job that I was sick, that I had any health problems, because I was pretty sure that was not something that employers were looking for in an employee. This was not going to help me. I didn't want to be that person. So I thought it was important for me as much as possible to keep up this image of someone who was healthy and strong, no problems, could take on anything, even though it was so far from the truth. But so I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell anybody ever. And every time I couldn't come into work, for every meeting I missed, every time I called in sick, I lied. I made up excuses. I said I had the flu or food poisoning or a pipe burst in my apartment or whatever. I just always made something up. And to make things worse, my immune system was really bad shape at that point in my life. So I actually often did get sick and get food poisoning and all these things. And my pipes did actually burst a couple of times, so it was just constant. And as I started getting closer to people in that job, I hated the experience of lying. So what I learned is that taking on something like this, at least for me, I was probably going to have to keep up a facade the whole time, and that was going to be exhausting, and that lying to people was going to be much more difficult than I'd ever anticipated, because once I made friendships and got closer to colleagues, it was lying to friends of mine, and I hated doing that. It was really stressful, but I didn't feel like I had any other choice. I didn't think I could start telling people that I was chronically ill, because I was pretty sure that was not going to be good. And the third thing that I learned was that even though a job like this that is accommodating in nature might be doable, it was guaranteed to keep me locked up in this CFS prison forever. Because I was just never going to be able to work on recovery while trying to keep up with this job. Maybe some other people can. I don't know what you can do. I don't know what anybody else can do. We are all different. And I imagine others, maybe if they had a better approach or a different mindset, better habits, maybe they could make it happen. I don't want to make anyone else think that it's not possible for them. But for me, I really felt like this just locked me in to this working this kind of job and never getting better for the rest of my life. So eventually I quit. Unless I wanted to stay sick forever, I was gonna need to do something else. By this point, I'd been living with this illness for many years, and I was so fed up with it, and I couldn't keep going. I couldn't keep going where every single day, every day was a struggle. This was just no way to live. Where I had anxiety about virtually all activities in life because I didn't know, if we're invited to a birthday party or whatever, how I was going to get through it or if I was going to get through it. I couldn't keep living with a body that I couldn't rely on, a body that was always exhausted and felt like it was made of lead. From there, I went on to my recovery journey. This was kind of the end of the struggle of just simply living with chronic fatigue syndrome. Recovery was definitely hard work as well, and a full-time job in its own right. But it was finally when that also important trajectory changed dramatically, and I started seeing myself finally coming out of this prison that I had been in of illness for so many years. So yeah, throughout this whole incredible journey, I slowly learned that I just had to live one day at a time, and that everything had a lesson in it. Every moment of suffering, every wrong turn, every moment of pain had something to teach me. And the way that I could keep moving forward was to make sure that I learned from every single one of those missteps or every single one of those failed experiments. I learned that a moment of pain can be a moment of growth, and it can be an opportunity for me to learn how to take less wrong turns in the future, how to make better decisions in the future, how to know myself and my body and my illness better, and to handle things better moving forward. I think that most of us find that when we go through difficult times, when we're facing a lot of challenges, there is a tremendous amount of growth that happens in these challenging moments that is difficult to achieve when things are going smoothly. It's a silver lining that I'm grateful for that comes with all of this challenge. I never want to be grateful for suffering. I would never want to suggest that anybody else should be grateful for suffering. But it's brought me to who I am today, and I love who I am today. And if I could go back and take it all away, I don't think that I could, because it launched me in such a different direction, this illness, and it taught me so much. I still have a lot of, trauma from it. It's not all, you know, happy, smiley. I'm not looking at it all through rose-colored glasses. There's a lot of bad in there for sure, a lot of stress and a lot of things that I've had to work through, but there's been a ton of good as well. I think if you can keep working and keep learning and keep growing, when you come out the other side, you're really gonna love who you are when you get out that other side. So I hope you're enjoying this chronic fatigue syndrome recovery journey of mine that I'm sharing with you. I'm really coming to appreciate how much our stories have power. I know how much I just really thrive off of hearing all of your stories. I learn so much. I'm inspired by them. I'm comforted by the commonalities that I see, knowing that I'm not alone. So if you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that little gray bell if you want to know when future videos are coming out. I put out new videos every week, and I would absolutely love for you to join me for the next one. So thank you again. I wish you well, and I will see you in the next video.